Good morning, Tribal Jazzman Scholar. One of the things that gives us perspective is the ability to see our own life, our own experiences, our own impressions of the world against some other experiences. And often visiting another country is a way to gain perspective. I had a seminal moment in my life which gave me perspective of my privilege and of my freedom, and also generated a deep empathy in me for people who do not share my freedoms and privileges. I've had a few of these, but the one that I wanted to share was having to do with freedom from political oppression. I had the opportunity in 1986 to travel to Chile. I had worked with an organization that had been seeking to raise money for human rights work in Chile. And the way we raised money was we sponsored informational lectures. We sponsored musical groups from Chile that sang songs of protest. This was during a time when Chile was under a very brutal dictatorship, Pinochet, and he had taken power in the early 70s in a violent overthrow of a democratic government, Salvador Allende's government. And he was ruling the country with an iron fist. He had a police force / military force called the Carabineros, which were notorious for their violence. And while I was studying Spanish and culture in Peru in the 1980s, I was invited by a friend to join him in Santiago and some other cities in Chile. He sent me a letter in late December 1985. And I joined him around Christmas time in 1985 to go to Chile. And I began to we met with university professors who had colleagues abducted and very brutally killed. And hearing these firsthand accounts, I was getting my already deep sense of political sort of self-righteous, social justice mentality was getting fired up quite a bit. Then we were living with a family in a southern city in Concepcion. And this family was a very typical family, but they were very intelligent and very articulate and very opposed to the government, as were apparently most people at the time. Very unpopular government. And the son was a high school student who was involved in organizing anti-government protests at his school, and these kinds of things were extremely dangerous to do. And he wanted to share with us some of the literature that he and his friends had been putting together. So we went out one afternoon to photocopy the literature, and we found that the photocopy stores were closed. It was siesta. So we sat on a park bench waiting for the stores to open. And while we were sitting there like the only people in public out, a police officer walked by and began to eye us and walk back and forth. And this boy of 17 had in his lap a manila folder full of this, what would be considered seditious literature. And he was fidgeting a lot. And I said, he was making me uncomfortable because he was fidgeting so much. And I thought he was attracting the attention of the policeman who was watching us. And I said, are you nervous? And he said, no more nervous than I always am. And we were able to take care of business, and we didn't get accosted, and nothing happened that afternoon. But the next day we were taking a long family hike, 2 or 3 miles over these very verdant green countryside hills to the beach for a day at the ocean. And on our way back, we all noticed there was maybe 5 or 6 people, women and children and others in this family. And we looked up on the hill and we saw a couple of soldiers hiding behind a tree and then running to another tree and hiding, and they were peeking around the tree watching us. And these were soldiers with machine guns on their backs, and the family became very nervous, and we walked a little faster, and then we noticed that they'd gone over the edge of a hill and were coming down on another side of the hill, and they were probably going to cut us off at this place where the road was turning. We were certain they were going to sort of head us off, and they were all talking nervously, and then they just decided suddenly to spontaneously step off the road under a tree in the grass and lie in the grass. And they started telling stories, and they started laughing uproariously. And I was very frightened. I was lying in this grass thinking to myself, all I want right now is to go back to my own country, to Los Angeles, California, where no soldiers with machine guns are going to hunt me down and want to abduct me and kill me, and all these terrible thoughts I had about what was about to happen, is I was very frightened. Probably the scariest I've been in my life. I've had frightening moments, but this was a prolonged 10, 15, 20 minutes of lying there waiting for these soldiers to arrive. And the family was loud and boisterous. And I realized later that it was probably the confidence that they exuded in their laughter and boisterousness and loudness that intimidated the soldiers. They were young soldiers, and they probably didn't want to come bother us. And I don't even know if they had any intentions to do so. They were just acting in an intimidating manner, which was not uncommon for the police and soldiers in that country to do all the time with the populace. But I had an insight lying there, and it was this that I wanted to share. As I thought to myself, I want nothing more than to be home and be safe. The way I was able to transform that experience in that moment was to realize that these people, these wonderful, warm, hospitable, friendly, intelligent, compassionate, generous people who had taken me into their home and fed me and laughed with me and shared stories with me and eaten meals with me, these beautiful people who I'd just spent a day at the beach with couldn't go anywhere. They could not get on a plane, next flight out, to their safe haven of the United States of America, Los Angeles. They were Chilean citizens. This was their world, their country, their experience. And that gave me deep, profound insight and perspective into my privilege, because they couldn't leave it. This was their reality. It was a big insight for me. And I went from fear in that moment to a kind of resolute, defiant willingness to face that kind of oppression with much more courage and less fear, because I guess I got really angry, and I turned my fear into anger and resolution to stand against that kind of oppression, to commit myself to facing it out of principle. And experiences give us that kind of perspective, and I wanted to share that experience. Thanks for coming and joining me, Tribal Jazzman Scholar. Bye-bye.